Escaping the Fold by Vincent Merkel. The Thylacine Queen. Again, like a fool, I laughed at my good fortune and yelled up to the one who offered survival. "I've got it!" I shouted like an imbecile to the stranger who saved me. "Help!" I cried, as if the glorious strands thrown from above were not enough. I felt a surge of hope and strength course through my veins and rejuvenate my muscles. An outside force helped me, much like a mother lightly guides her waddling toddler by gently pushing on his rear end. A guiding hand of a father lovingly lifted me to the top of that looming edge. Hand over hand, it was with a do-or-die mentality that my feet clambered and arms labored to find the roots of trees that intertwined with rocks at the summit. I briefly rested at the top, arms woven in a cluster of knotty roots, my chest securely on the plateau and body bent at the waist, with legs hanging over the face of granite. I looked about the dark forest that faced me and let out a rebel yell, as any one raised in Virginia who just avoided death might do. I pulled my right leg onto the terra firma, followed by my left, and stood. I leaned forward, so that if I was to fall, it would be to the root grips that would easily hold my weight. Raising my canteen, I thanked the powers that rule the heavens that I hadn't lost the burdensome weight of my supplies. My parched lips and mouth were gratified by the now warm water from my canteen. The telltale voice of a monkey barked out a warning from the dark forest on the top of what was my world. The guttural language directed to my ears from the brush was punctuated by a crashing noise in the foliage that quickly trailed off down a hill opposing the face I had just climbed. I hollered out one last time, "Hey, come back! Have a drink on me, friend!" The sound of someone or something running in the forest disappeared and left me alone wondering about my great fortune and the wondrous and apparently shy creature that threw a lifeline to a doomed soul. Exhaustion is an understatement for expressing the fatigue that quickly overtook my body and mind. A cursory search of the ridgeline brought my attention to an alcove of rocks that would provide 3 walls, a partial stone overhang, and low-lying bushes as suitable protection for a night of rest. I tied the length of rope that my mysterious savior left behind around the trunks of the bushes that enclosed the rocky nook. The goal was to make a fence that might deter any creatures of the night that might cause me danger through their curiosity or hunger. After being satisfied that I had suffered no terrible injuries from my journey up the cliff, I built a small fire, unrolled my patchwork quilt of skins, ate venison and fruits, and fell fast asleep on my comfortable bedding with deerskin rucksack as a pillow. My worries were chased away by enervation, and my eyes stitched themselves shut to dream of love and laughter in another life. Although the sleep was deep, at one point that night something stirred in the bushes near my makeshift camp. My eyes dreamily half opened, and out of habit I checked the little fire that had turned to smoldering coals. As a final dying flame sprang from the embers, I dreamed that a figure was crouching just outside of the rope fence, watching me sleep. The figure sitting there was ethereal, a phantom of a woman, and as still as a tree. She wore some sort of helmet made of gold and silver, a leather thong and skirt and a half-top also of animal skins. Her shins were guarded by metal greaves, and her feet in sandals, tied with a webbing of straps. In one hand was a long spear, with a shining tip pointed in my direction. A bronzed face framed by a shock of golden-brown hair that spilled from under the ancient helmet stared at me with steely gray eyes. The flame extinguished, and the form of the woman disappeared with it. I interpreted the vision as a dream, as I was fully in between the world of sleep and reality. It was the sweetest of dreams. I closed my eyes so my mind would not lose the image of the curious beauty that looked over me as I slept, and I slept well. I awoke, refreshed, albeit a bit sore from the previous day's trials. Before moving from the safety of the cubby of rocks that guarded me from the night's predators, I sat up, ate, and then drank the last of my water stores. I stood and walked out of the cozy alcove and gazed over the cliff out to the horizon. To the northeast, about 20 miles away, was a hazy mass that made up an island. Soon I would prepare a fire as a distress signal and wait for a response, but first I would walk the ridge and find the best place to do it. Something was bothering me. A thought teased my mind. Standing on the edge of the cliff, I looked down. I almost became dizzy from the height. I quickly turned and looked to where I awoke that morning. Something was missing. The rope was gone. I assumed that it was the phantom woman from my dream. She was an actuality. She had been watching me struggle with the monkeys and my ascent, threw her lifeline over the cliff, then waited to reclaim her rope while I snoozed. She did not know if I was an enemy or friend, but for some reason took a chance of losing her anonymity by helping me. I was puzzled by numerous unanswered questions. I have found answers to several, but many remain unanswered mysteries. I laughed out loud and faced the woods that coursed gradually down a hill leading to the south side of the island. The forest was intermingled with rocky outcroppings and dense vegetation. I called out a few times and waited for a reply with no answers. I looked again over the edge of the perilous cliff and down to the beach that I had recently inhabited. The jungle entrance to my cove was visible. What was beyond, however, was not discernible from that vantage point. I first explored the ridge by going to the west, as it was a shorter distance to its termination. Although it sloped upward, I hiked for over 1.5 miles. I climbed a tall tree and looked over the canopy of green on the south side, and then it was clear to me that I was on an island. The whole south side was a wooded slope that, with the exception of a few irregularities, was navigable and ended abruptly at the ridgeway which spanned from the farthest western point to the farthest eastern point of the isle. The beach that I had spent the last month on, under the face and to the north of the granite wall, was less than 1/3 of the total landmass. From my perch in the tree, I was surprised by the vastness of the island, and I found it hard to believe that it was without any signs of civilization. How could a place like that be overlooked for habitation in an age of satellites and rocket ships? No airplanes flew overhead. No cities marked the beach fronts on the south shores. Looking east from the high spot, it was evident that fissures in the ridge would force my trek inland. Standing on the rock ledge again, I knew that I was somewhere above my cove, where the gigantic eel and former head of Linnea now swam. I found the source of the fresh-water spring that fed my apartment below. The cold water bubbled straight from a crack in the stone wall. After refilling my belly and canteen, I washed my arms, legs, and head in the cool water under the scorching sun. Walking up and down the ridge took some time, as my feet were still somewhat tender. I kicked the worthless lone boot close to where I believed the other one had fallen during my struggles for life just the day before. After cutting swaths of leather from my bedding, I made a pair of crude but comfortable and effective moccasins. They helped a lot to keep my feet from hurting. With new footwear helping my mobility, I gathered dry wood from the forest floor and searched for evidence of a trail. I was also looking for the girlish face dressed in the ancient trappings of a warrior, the woman from my dream. I moved quietly as I gathered sticks and placed them as far to the east on the ridge as I could. I would build a big fire, one to get the attention of any who might see me from the faraway island in the northern sea. Occasionally, a broken twig, bent branch, or toppled grass would catch my attention, and I wondered what animal or person had been in that spot before me. After gathering a healthy stack of branches, I considered abandoning my fire building for the time being to explore a shadow of a path I found near my last encampment. However, my unrelenting thoughts of reuniting with Vangelis and George kept me working on the rocky peak. I looked out to the waters where I had battled with Linnea. The sea looked motionless and far away, but I knew that the winds were sweeping the crests that day. The gusts consistently blew with a force that reminded me of the danger that a careless step might bring me, a long fall and certain death. I completed my fire pit and filled it with stacked wood high on the rocky ledge. I waited in the shade of the trees, but the sun refused to go down, and it would be many hours before darkness set in. To pass the time, I decided to follow the scant path near my encampment. I would try to read the spores on the ground and follow them until they brought me to game or to the mystery woman who threw me the rope and saved my life. I quickly constructed a wooden barricade and hid my belongings in the rocky cubbyhole where I had slept. With my spear on my back, my machete hanging from side, and bow in hand, I slowly moved along the path into the woods. Some points along the path were hilly, with a few of them being fairly steep. Gray and white monoliths and stony crags pushed out from the terrain at frequent intervals. I spotted a large tan animal. It was a quadruped. His striped haunches stuck out from behind one of the big stones. It had a thin waist, decorated with the stripes of a tiger, and a long tail that reminded me of a kangaroo. It hadn't noticed me, probably because a light breeze was taking my scent away from the creature. It jumped back and forth, engaging some rodent that would inevitably make a tasty snack. As the animal jumped back, I saw his full profile. The hairs on my arms stood up as I realized that I was looking upon a creature that had long been extinct. It had the body of a large dog, lean, with a deep chest, a long neck with stretched face, and jaws that opened widely, well past 90 degrees. It moved unlike any dog that I had ever seen, but I knew what this creature was. I had seen pictures of it years before. It was a crafty and ferocious carnivore, the long-gone wolf-like marsupial that once inhabited the forests and fields of Tasmania. It was a thylacine. The tawny animal was also known as the Tasmanian tiger. A branch cracked under the weight of something approaching me from behind. I turned, and another one of the loping creatures bobbed his head up and down as his feet nervously tapped the ground in anticipation of my movement. Not knowing the disposition of those creatures left me at a disadvantage. I slowly raised my bow and loosely fit an arrow to the ready string and moved closer to a tree to my left that had limbs fit for climbing in a hurry. I looked to the branch and spotted yet another one of the animals beyond the tree, staring straight at me. There were 3 of the strange and wiry beasts. The one near the rocks stretched out to a length of 5 feet, and you could add another 2.5 feet of length for his massive tail. He abandoned his quarry and turned his thick neck and long wedge-shaped head towards me and pranced his feet in a little dance like the other thylacines. Just then a loud, crisp yipping echoed from behind another set of rocks in the path of my destination down the hill. All 3 of the wolf-like creatures slowly began to approach me. I thought it was wise to climb the tree and sat on a thick branch about 10 feet higher than ground level. If they treed me there, I could easily pick them off one by one with my bow. I looked around to keep track of the positioning of the creatures. They were quite amazing in their coordinated approach. Their footsteps were in unison, so that it had the sound of one creature moving in the brush. A slightly different type of yipping noise chirped in the air, and the animals stopped closing in. I slowly raised my bow and refitted an arrow, but before I could draw the string back, the strange yelping commenced from a different position of the original sound. Upon hearing it, the animals bolted away from the tree and took cover behind stone projections in the forest. They moved with explosive speed. I looked towards the author of the strange dog sounds and strained to get a glimpse into the thick jungle and beyond. I decided to try an experiment. When I was younger and just a boy growing up in the wild rolling hills of my sweet homeland, a woodsman named Nugget Jones, one of the last true frontiersmen, born 100 years later than his calling, had taught me many secrets of the calls of nature. Among other survival skills, he showed me through deeds that one could commune with wildlife. The main lesson was that the mother of all creation is very unforgiving, but if one listened hard enough, the secret language of the wild would reveal itself. Some creatures could be controlled with sounds. Nugget could command frogs to sing and chirp in a frenzied swamp, and he could compel them to silence. Birds would come to his voice. Ducks and owls had a predictable vocabulary. Coyotes and foxes had complex languages that he had mastered. Some animals, especially those that were in the throes of passion or rage, could never be talked to, but Jones's voice was a powerful tool. I tried to remember the first sound of yipping that I heard just moments before when the thylacines started towards me. I hung my bow from a branch and cupped my hands over my mouth and belted out a series of high-pitched yelps in the best falsetto that I could muster. It was a good imitation. The timing, volume, and cadence was right, and one of the dog-like creatures cautiously showed his head. He began to come out from behind his stone cover when a screeching command of sounds emitted from behind me, barking out uncanny orders. It was almost as though a trapped raccoon was gobbling out a warning, mixed with the original yips of the Tasmanian tigers. The three creatures sped to the sound. They were formidable animals. Fast and clean, they joined with each other and turned to face me from the rocky column that presumably hid the vocalizing raccoon. I heard another noise, almost like a whisper. It almost sounded like water flowing. The wily quadrupeds sat as if domesticated, neatly in a row in front of the rock, mouths closed with eyes towards me. I formulated some very curious suspicions about the nature of the sound that appeared to order those wild and sleek animals from a day gone by. I was dubious to the notion that another thylacine called out those commands. I tried my hypothesis by tossing my bow to the ground and jumping out of the tree. I spoke softly to the sitting four-legged antiquities and moved toward them by a few steps. A lower sound came out from behind those rocks, a stern command in a foreign language. I could not reproduce the guttural sound, but it was enough to unnerve the dogs, who arose to their feet and began to growl and snap their mouths in my general direction.